welcome to this session. I'm really honored to introduce Scott Walker and Ben Manwairing, who are the founders of Matter Innovation. And what I would say, and I hope you all can do some introduction of yourselves as well, Scott, as I hand over to you. But what I would say is this: what Future Law Institute is attempting to do in the world, we haven't seen it being done before. It's something that it's a journey fraught with uncertainty and complexity that we don't have all the answers to. We know that we'll make mistakes, but we are committed to taking action. And we have partnered with the Matter Innovation consulting firm that consults and helps governments all over the world with their public sector innovation programs and strategies. And also, I mean, Ben comes from, you know, leading innovation in some of the biggest tech companies in the world. And I hope that you all will share a little bit about yourselves as you do your session, Scott and Ben. But this is one of our key partners going forward, Matter Innovation, to help us build our network communities of practice and the interventions, the legal system change interventions we want to be able to catalyze, support, and enable lawyers all over the world to do. So without further ado, thank you and welcome Scott and Ben to the Future Law Virtual Summit, and over to you.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you for having us indeed. Thank you, Margaret. Appreciate the introduction. As has been mentioned, my name is Ben Manwairing. I am the founder of Matter Innovation. Just as by way of a very brief introduction, I have 20 years experience of delivering innovation in some of the most challenging environments known to man, the commercial world. I've worked on glamorous stuff like toilet cleaners, and I've worked on boring stuff like governments and tech giants like Google. And my role primarily throughout that is to deliver change, powerful, impactful change that has material value in commercial terms, in terms of turnover and profitability, and in the public realm to really create better circumstances for citizens. And we're going to give you a very short presentation around the concept of disorder and disruption, primarily disruption, and how change can have a positive effect through being disruptive. So I'm going to share screen, have a small presentation. Let's see if I can make this work for everybody. 1 second. Let's try that. Can you see that screen?
Yes,
That's
we can. Yes, we can.
Excellent. Okay. So the title of our presentation is "Bringing Law into Disorder: The Transformative Power of Positive Disruption in Making Things Better." Scott and I will double hand this, and if I may ask, if you have any questions, please do hold off until the end of this presentation. It's about 15 to 20 minutes, and we have a Q&A opportunity at the end. We're very happy to take any questions and field those at that point. There are 4 sections to what we're going to talk about. The first thing we're going to talk about is the principles of disruption and why that works. So the first question is, why would you disrupt? What's the reason for doing that? I'm going to show you two visual charts here. The first one, these are the world's most valuable brands from the year 2020, the year 2000. The more astute or the more observant amongst you might notice a number of these brands no longer exist. There have been some controversies around number 27, for instance, Xerox. That's no longer around. I think we all know why. The interesting chart about this actually is looking at the next one, which is today's chart. And you'll see there's a very different makeup here. So the interesting fact in this is that if you look at things like number 6, Alibaba, if you look at number 18, Mutai, which is a Chinese liquor producer, Xfinity is a global communications company that's built on the internet platform. A lot of these businesses didn't exist 20 years ago, yet they are already in the 20 most valuable businesses or 30 most valuable businesses on earth. And the important part about this is, why do you disrupt? Because there are clearly new opportunities in the market, and the long established traditional things never actually stay the same. Things are always radically changing. In commercial world particularly, we see things like Amazon, that was a tiny bookseller 20 years ago, becoming the most valuable business on earth with huge market capitalization. So disruption is happening in every category, and if you think you're not being disrupted, there's a bit of a shock coming, because if you're not disrupting somebody, you are being disrupted yourself. So the critical part about this is that change is a pace, it comes at a pace. It is important for people to embrace change, but often we ask people what they want to see and what they want to see happen in the future. And this is often the wrong question asked to the wrong people. There's a very famous quote from an industrialist named Henry Ford, who said, if I asked people what they wanted, they would have said a faster horse. Now, he didn't give them a faster horse. He revolutionized two categories. He revolutionized public transportation and he revolutionized industrial manufacturing by disrupting both of those particular phenomena. The important part here is to not give people what they ask for, but give them what they never dreamed was possible. And these are, again, disruptive, positive intentions that have allowed the world to make dramatic improvements in industrialization, in global access to movement, in transportation. And all of these things have come around because taking a disruptive view of the world and taking a strident perspective, rather than listening to the desires and the wants and the needs, those sort of very narrow horizon express needs that people think they want to do in the future. As I said, it's important to disrupt, because if you don't, you are likely to be being disrupted yourself. It's often the case of, I ask this of my clients, and they say, oh, well, no one's disrupting us. And we'll say, okay, you might want to sit down for a moment. I had a very interesting conversation many years ago when I had a client in the music industry. I had a very interesting conversation on a speakerphone, not unlike this circumstance, with a guy called Steve Jobs, who ran a small computer company out in California. Interestingly, he, with a number of expletives, he told the record industry execs that I was sitting with that they were out of business, and they laughed at him. They said, what is he talking about? He runs a computer company. Lo and behold, EMI no longer really has any kind of real substantial standing in the marketplace, and Apple is again one of the biggest companies on earth, and a significant proportion of their income is derived from a music category. They decided that they would positively disrupt everything about that, with hardware, with software, with service, and they took advantage of their rivals' complacency and in their belief and their regard that they were going to be disrupted by a small computer company that had nothing to do with music. So importantly, the lessons here are that whilst things remain stable and consistent from a day-to-day basis, often these challenges and these threats might come from unexpected sources and outside influences. And we need to be cognizant that there are real and existential threats available to us, but we can also be an existential threat to ourselves and try and challenge ourselves to improve. There's a key part around how and why disruption works. This is a very advanced internal combustion engine from Mercedes-Benz. Now, we're reaching a point here that you can only value engineer. In other words, you can only make these refinements and incremental improvements up to a point. There is a limit, there's a ceiling to how far you can improve through incremental additional value engineering. You get to a point where there is no more headroom. So you need to find a different way. And the best way to do that is to disrupt. Tesla have come along and said the internal combustion engine no longer is really relevant to us in the future. Fossil fuels are no longer part of our agenda in the world in the next 100 years. There has to be a better way. Fascinatingly, they've taken a market cap of 93 billion in a very short order. I mean, they've been, again, in existence for under 12 years as a going concern, and are currently larger than the two biggest US car manufacturers in terms of volume combined. I think Ford's market cap's around 45 billion and GM's is about 33. It's a real stark example of, again, complacency in markets and in businesses that have been well established over 100 years. And these new upstarts are taking a very different perspective. What's this got to do with law, you might ask? I'm going to hand it over to Scott, who's going to make a point about a change-resistant sector.
Yes, well, we all know, and I'm sure it's going to be voiced many times over the course of your 5 days, that the legal sector is incredibly slow to change. And there's reasons, as you know, why that precedent dictates. We know that legislation is often a very slow process from the kind of political intent and will from a white paper all the way through to bring it into Parliament, and regulation would always lag behind technology. And that's why we hear the kind of ex ante, ex post, how should we deal with this type of thing? But we no doubt that technology disrupts the law more often than the other way around. And ultimately, you know, in order to change the ways that these things happen, you need to disrupt the system. And if we continue to rely on the same forces and the same actors, unfortunately, those things which have left us where we are, we'll end up in pretty much the same sort of place. And so what is really required from a systemic or systems perspective is to think much more holistically about how to do this in a very, very different way, which requires a new mindset. And, we'd like to introduce some of those principles about how can we, and the knowledge we bring from both the public and commercial sector, introduce those into the legal policy systems world, so we start to roadmap and think a bit differently about the architecture we want in the future.
Thank you, Scott. So one of the critical parts and components of introducing a disruptive approach to any system, any sector, any market is the value of lateral inputs. Often, as Scott has mentioned, if you do the same things in the same ways, you're going to end up with the same results. So there are a number of things that you can do from a lateral perspective that allow you to make these perceptual leaps into different ways. The first is really to be bold, and bold is crucial in disruption, because what you're essentially doing is asking people to do things that are unforeseen, unprecedented, and uncharted. So that is a bold decision to make. You need to be brave in order to do that. You need radical thinkers who are unencumbered by traditional constraints, the traditional rules or patterns of behavior, perceptions, and even cultural norms that typify a system or a sector or a market. So the first rule is around being bold and being brave. Secondly, it's the ability to see around corners. It's often the case that when we work very closely in a sector that we become myopic to some of the challenges that are pretty much staring us in the face. We're too close to the action day to day from a tactical perspective to really understand, or to have a perspective around what would be required to change the game strategically. So by bringing lateral thinkers into the consideration set, it gives you that ability to see around corners, to see through blind spots. Third is about being comfortable with the unfamiliar. There are conservative sectors, and I think the legal sector is one such, for very probity-based reasons that they are conservative. Law is, engineering is. They default to safe solutions. In law's case, obviously, it's defaulting back to case and to precedent. In engineering, it's about minimum tolerance and standards. Disruptors operate actually at the edges of possibility and beyond them. They break the laws, they break the rules, they break the confines and the considerations. And it's only by breaking those constraints within categories that we can understand what can be the new possible. So having a comfort with uncertainty is critical too. And then there's the value of unintended consequences. Now, these sticky notes here are very famous, and I think everyone in the world uses them on pretty much a daily basis in offices. But they came about through a happy accident. Now, the material scientists at 3M wanted to create a reusable adhesive, and they found they weren't getting the kind of result they wanted. However, they could find that they had this application that if they stuck it onto notes, they could reposition notes on surfaces. The way that this happens is you can only introduce these serendipitous moments of happy, fortuitous accident if you have the right conditions for conditionality that allow you to have these unintended consequence moments. Scott's going to tell you again, from a cognitive dissonance point of view, how that is welcomed and how we could welcome that into the legal sector.
Well, cognitive dissonance is, what we're talking about here is the ability to disagree and see different perspectives in order to have that type of clash. So one is informed in different ways. We lawyers are very good at arguing, but we're not talking about just having a discussion and moot points of law. Actually, what we're thinking here is around how do we include differences and diversity of thinking. Unfortunately, the legal profession is quite homogenous. I remember when I was at law school in my mid-20s going at night school, it was a lot of the same types of individuals, similar types of backgrounds, And actually, I remember looking in the room thinking, actually, there is a very limited diversity, just in the individuals, but also everyone is channeled in to be able to think in a certain way, in order to read the law in a certain way, in order to have a very formulaic way of answering questions. And that's problematic in the law sector, because you've got this kind of contradiction here that ultimately, if you structured purposely to limit the diversity of thought because of the principles of what is ratio decidendi, i.e. that the case law dictates, then you're increasingly allowing people to follow into a certain structured pattern and a way of thinking, and that actually limits the ability to go to, as Ben says, go towards the edges, go to where it's uncomfortable, go to those different places where the actual innovation occurs. So you've got this contradiction. The law system only has diversity of individuals often, but also this, you know, not able to embrace adequately a diversity of thought and perspective. And I think that it's really, really important in looking at the challenges we have to introduce new ways of critically thinking about challenges, fresh inputs, those that do challenge the status quo in different ways. Being unconventional is absolutely necessary. But here we see the legal profession that ultimately, if you start to bend, you know, if you break the law, you go to jail or you get fined. But actually, how do you push it back against the law or public policy aims in very different ways to get different and also unexpected results? And I think if we are allowing convention and precedent to continue to be the path we follow on, we can only expect that we'll end up in a pretty similar destination. And unfortunately, we need to head in a very, very different path. So something needs to change. We need to forge a new direction and actually work out what is a brighter path ahead.
Thank you, Scott. So that's the theory. There's some introduction points around some of the principles and the reasons why we need to do this. We have some practical experience of this, so I thought it's a very quick expose of some of the examples that we have worked on internationally around disruptive innovation approaches that have made a difference. The first one is another small company out of California that has a tech angle to them. They're now called Alphabet, but they were Google when we worked with them. We spent 8 years working with Google, helping them to shift their culture in order to change the game. Now, when we started working with Google, which is well over 10 years ago, they were primarily a search organization and words, you know, an internet search engine, effectively. And they had incredibly talented, siloed engineers that had very, very narrow band specialisms. It was our job and our role to break the shackles and the confines of these silos and get people to look above the parapet and see adjacencies and say, we've got other skills that this could be applied to. So through developing a curriculum of innovation and applied creativity over 8 years, the work we did with Google stimulated the development of real transformational change for that organization and allowed them to introduce products like Street View, like Google Earth, like Gmail, for instance, which obviously was a part of their cornerstone of getting embedded base across a huge number of people across the earth. And even some of these more moonshot-based activities. This image is actually of Project Loon, which is a geostable balloon in the high atmosphere, which relays satellite internet to remote places on Earth that otherwise wouldn't have access to the internet because there's no way to reach it with fixed line infrastructure. So we've helped that organization transform themselves in a small way. We help them to transform themselves into this huge global powerhouse that's really advanced and leading technology. So it's capable, it is something that can work whether you're a new entrant or whether you're well established. The second one is in the public realm. This is with the Dubai government. We helped a very conservative organization amongst one of their agencies, which looked after the effectively the global business travel community in Dubai. As you may, if you have spent any time in Dubai, you'd know that tourism is a very, very important market for them. The business tourism, business travel is very, very critical too. We helped transform Dubai's offer in that regard by making them more customer driven, helping them to deflect and to compete against non-traditional rivals. So outside entrants coming in, commercial businesses coming in and taking share of exhibition space, taking share of meetings and incentives in hotels and so on. So these emergent threat of non-traditional rivals help them really transform from being in a position of hegemonic power and of market dominance to being in a much more competitive situation. The third one, we helped a tobacco business in the US move from being an agricultural business. Now they are, well established, well over 100 years. They make cigarettes out of leaves and paper, and you burn them. That's a very traditional, vertically integrated agricultural business. Now, through legislative pressure, through societal issues, through cultural change, smoking is dropping off. And we help them to transition and transform their organization to a digitally enabled product set, a digitally enabled mindset, and to create a market-leading product and a new way of considering a tobacco product which didn't have the harm and the impact that it otherwise would. And this was a $500 million per annum brand within 2 years of launch, a 7-year journey, but $500 million of return in terms of that transformation journey. Scott, you want to take this one?
Yeah, go on. So the final example is we worked in South Africa with both South Africa and the UK government. We won a procurement contract, and what's for us the most interesting part is when we got to in country, as it were, we realized that what we put forward was the wrong plans. And so we then ripped up those plans in order to forge a new, very different direction based on the situation we found ourselves in. And actually be able to realize that instead of going down a procurement tick box exercise just to do a project, by being brave and bolder, being much more disruptive, we forced other partners to come on board and do things in very different ways. I do remember the most senior government official in the British government pointing a finger at me and Ben saying, "You guys are dangerous." And he thought he was telling us off, but actually he was giving us the biggest compliment we could ask for.
Absolutely. So quickly, so how can this be applied into the legal sector? Scott, I'm going to hand you back again to talk through this point.
So look, most boards are review and concur, but I think in these very uncertain times there is no roadmap. Uncertainty dictates we have to do things in new and different ways. We would like to introduce the principle of a disruption board, which is very different to what a traditional board would do and function. So most of those original boards are very much, say, reactive conversations. They look inwards from an organizational perspective to solve immediate challenges. They are biased towards consensus and concur, and they tend to be linear and unambitious and conform, typified by the homogeneous middle. We think that actually there's value in bringing the principles of disruption board into the legal sphere, and we very much like to design and work with the future law team to say, how can we bring this into reality? How do we bring the power of radical outside expert thinking so we have diversity of thought? How do we stretch ambitions? How do we bring in those lateral inputs for unexpected results so we get heterogeneous and exponential type thinking as opposed to just doing the same thing again and again? So we've mapped out a bit of a process around how we can actually deliver that in conjunction. New principles, new ways of working that embrace that radical thinking. Hey, Ben, do you want to just quickly finish off around the lateral and the longitudinal ways that we might consider approaching it?
So yeah, so in our experience, bringing from a disruption perspective, it's important to bring 3 different dimensions of actors into that mix. So the first is the longitudinal. Those are your typical sequential actors in a value chain. In the business sense, clearly there's a similar analog in the legal sector in terms of a start, a middle part, and an ending. So it's critical that those end-to-end considerations are brought into bear. The additional 2 are slightly more interesting. The latitudinal ones are looking at adjacencies. So things we can learn from categories that have analogous kinds of approaches or might have similar system-related procedures and processes that we can learn and incorporate. And that allows us to take that first step of looking outside of our own purview and embracing and engaging with actors that can provide us with a different perspective on the same sorts of challenges. And critically, the third part, we talked around this already, the lateral contributors are your free radicals, your breakthrough thinkers. In the past, we've used people as diverse as military commanders and musicians into our innovation sets that sound at first glance completely ludicrous and ridiculous because they have no bearing and no direct correlation in terms of their interest or experience of what we're studying. But by being unencumbered by a category or a phenomenon, it allows a freedom of risk-taking, of imagination, of creative leaps that can often have a really profound effect. So to wrap up, on Monday, we'll be holding a disruption seminar, a little taster example, where we will start to explore how a board dedicated to legal systems change can transform this sector. And it's about adopting, absorbing some of the disruptive principles. And there'll be a 90-minute session. We're going to demonstrate some of the exercises we've used to develop and deliver that with a disruptive mindset. And we'd encourage applications and interest. There'll be a very tight guest list invited for that. And we hope that will be a very interactive and engaging session and give you a real flavour for not just the theory around this, but the practical application of how we translate disruption into really meaningful and powerful ways forward to really revolutionise categories and businesses.
And I think just finally to wrap up, I think that as the lead negotiators and these communities of practices are developed, we can work with those individuals, teams, communities to put in place some of these principles about how do we go beyond what is possible, stretch, break the rules, bend the rules. Lawyers don't like breaking the rules, but bend the rules to such points where the elastic snaps a little bit. Then I think we'd love to explore that and see how do we create models that actually take us to a very different place using the principles we've set out in this short presentation. So I think that's it from us, isn't it, Ben? I think we've short for Q&A, but that wasn't on purpose.
I think it was on purpose. It was on purpose. No, not really, but no, thanks so much, Scott and Ben, for that presentation, because it really puts into context the relationship that we are forging with you to help us do the work that we're doing. And so at Future Law, we have the meta-legal interdisciplinary approach that we were trying to foster, which I think aligns so well with this lateral and longitudinal approaches to bringing the diverse perspectives in. I have not seen any questions written in the chat, and we've run out of the Q&A time, but we're really excited about the session on Monday evening, where we hope to have this, we go through the exercises on this and probably make an announcement by Friday, coming out of the work, not Friday, Tuesday, coming out of the work that we do together on Monday, from the lead negotiators who attend that meeting and who we're especially inviting to attend that meeting. So unless there are questions directly in the room, are there any questions directly in the room? And we're not seeing any on this side. Yeah, I'd like to thank you, Scott and Ben, for giving us that taster into disruptive innovation for the legal sector, which I just want to say it's very difficult because path dependence and precedent and stare decisis and is what is required for parties to have certainty in terms of how we relate with each other. So it is the sector to test and experiment this on, because it's one of the toughest, if not the toughest. Yeah.
We love to run towards those intractable, wicked problems. So, let's have fun dancing in the dark.
Yeah. Thanks so much. Thanks so much.
Thank you very much. Enjoy your weekend.
Thank you very much.
Yeah. Okay. And stick along for any of the sessions that you want to. Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Okay. Thanks. Thanks, Dan.